Ladies and gentlemen, up next, I cordially invite Dr. Paikiasothy Saravanamuttu, Executive Director of the Center for Policy Alternatives.
Good morning, everyone, members of civil society, members of parliament, excellencies. The governance diagnostic that we have presented, I want to emphasize the word governance with regard to it, because at the end of the day, we talk about an economic crisis and we talk about a political crisis, but you mold the two together and you come up with the question of governance. What we have in Sri Lanka is now the opportunity to forge a new social contract. That is what has collapsed. That is what is rotten to the core. And in order to do that, we need to ensure that issues of accountability and transparency, that we get rid of the corrosive cancer of impunity which has been eating away at the state institutions. We need to ensure that we have a clear notion of conflict of interest. We need to ensure that there is a difference between a state institution and a government institution. And that is a distinction that, unfortunately, in our contemporary lives, we haven't seen acknowledged. So what I want to suggest to you is this, is that, yes, this is a governance diagnostic that does, in the immediate sense, cover the period of the IMF agreement. But we have a much longer task, a much more challenging task. And I would suggest to you that maybe it'll take 10 years for us to get back to where we were when the crisis broke, and then 25 years to proceed from there onwards in order to be able to make up the deficit in terms of growth in the country. And I want to say to you, and this is something that may seem, well, somewhat hackneyed in a sense, but at the core of our governance crisis is the executive presidency. The executive presidency consolidates so much of power with very little accountability, if any at all. Therefore, it needs to be abolished. And I appeal to political parties as we approach a presidential election to come up with the abolition of the executive presidency as core to their political program, because I think it's always been the case, in my opinion, that the problem was with Parliament. A referendum in the country could always have been won on the abolition of the executive presidency. The issue was with Parliament. Also, I'd like to focus on the question of the Attorney General's office. We are talking about corruption. We are talking about taking cases both in terms of what are now being called economic crimes, as well as the arguments with regard to allegations of war crimes and crimes against humanity, etc. The Attorney General is the chief advisor to the government, and the Attorney General is the chief prosecuting officer. There is surely an absolute conflict of interest as far as that's concerned, and therefore we need an office of a public prosecutor, and the Attorney General then can advise the government as far as legal defense or whatever is concerned. I mean, and the point here is surely the allegations are made largely against the government. How on earth then can the Attorney General provide information to the government and prosecute as well? So I think the abolition of the executive presidency and the creation of a public prosecutor's office, I think, is important. The third point that I want to make, of course, is that whilst there is a certain satisfaction that, look, there are no petrol queues and prices may well be coming down, etc., there is the lingering question of the tension between legality and legitimacy. The government is legal in that it went through the processes of appointing the president through parliament and all of that. But is it legitimate? And is not that the key at the end of the day to seeing any governance reforms through, because you have to carry the people along with you. That sensitivity, that empathy is what is at the core of democracy. It is about trust. It is about confidence. And if that is not there, we are probably risking, I'm not saying that it'll definitely be the case, but we're probably risking greater conflict into the future. So elections need to be held. At the present moment, we have the absurd situation of a president who has been voted in, who has been selected by Parliament, a Parliament which is, well, discredited by the public at large. We don't have provincial councils. The last provincial council election in the North and East, for example, was in 2013, 10 years ago. We don't have local government elections. And as a consequence, how do all of these things function to the extent that they do? They function through the office of the president. It's a total concentration and consolidation of power. You know. And with regard to the economic reforms that we're also suggesting, let me just give you one example. According to the constitution of this country, the president of this country appoints secretaries to ministries. And the secretary to the ministry is the chief financial officer responsible for the functioning of the ministry. We know, and I don't have to go into detail, of where these people have been appointed from. That needs to go. We need to have an independent public service as well. The specific acts that we have to engage in to clear up the problems with regard to the economic dimensions of governance are fine. But it is a longer-term question of building trust and confidence in government and in governance. And those require deep structural reforms, which we have to commence. Otherwise, I think, as someone said, it's putting plaster on a wooden leg or whatever the aphorism is. So we need to commit ourselves to the immediate challenge of what the IMF reforms entail. But we have to recognize that we are rebuilding the social contract in this country, and that takes time. And it'll take at least, in my opinion, a decade. Thank you.